Welcome to Speculating Wildly About Crime. My name is Jamie, and I will be your host today. We are going to be covering the quite baffling case of Lee Cutler. We are going to go back to the Midwest to a town called Buffalo Grove, Illinois. Buffalo Grove was one of the richer suburbs of the Chicago area. Not a lot of crime happened. Everybody knew everybody type of thing. During the time of Lee's disappearance, he was at the start of his senior year. He had a girlfriend at the time, which some stories say he had just recently broke up with. Some stories say he was still with, but it was a fairly new relationship. Her name was Autumn. Lee was also living with his mother and his stepdad, as well as his older brother. Lee was very, very close to his mother. This was kind of his rock. So it was a little sad and kind of hard for Lee that a few months before he went missing, Lee's grandmother was diagnosed with cancer. So Lee's mother took it upon herself at this time to move in with her mother for a little bit. That didn't sit well with Lee. So he begged his mom to come back home. And so after a few short months, she did decide to do that. Part of the reason for that was because Lee asked her to, and they were very close. The other part of that reason was Lee's stepdad, I believe his name was Barry, wasn't overly nice to him and his stepbrother. Lee's stepdad was also known to run around on Lee's mom, and he would openly talk about it with Lee. And so just wasn't the greatest relationship. So Lee really needed his mom to be back in the house to help him feel whole and help him feel comfortable again. A lot of his friends and family described him as somebody who was super duper kind. We're talking, give the shirt off your back. Lee always made sure that your cup was full before he's filling his own cup type of person. So a lot of times that meant that he would go without. He would always give advice to somebody, but not necessarily have somebody who he could go to and lean on when he was having a tough time. As a result of that, a lot of people saw him as being a quiet guy, but not to the point of he didn't have friends and he didn't have a social life, because he definitely still had that. The night that he goes missing, he has a sleepover with his friends. Definitely wasn't an outcast by any means, but more of a quiet guy. He was also described as somebody who was an avid writer, an avid reader, and one person had described his writing as the type of writing that would come out as he understood what it meant, but it would almost be a little cryptic. We'll put a pin in that because that's going to come back in a little bit. Although Lee was described as this quiet guy, there was one place that would get him to be in his element and break out of his shell. And that was within his religion. So Lee was Jewish. And when he was in ninth grade, he started this Jewish youth group. He started a local chapter, and it was nationally known as and please forgive me, I'm sure I'm going to not pronounce this right, but it was known as the B'nai B'rith Youth Organization. It's called BBYO for short. And that's what we're going to call it for the remainder of this podcast, because I'm not going to say that name again. He started this up in the Buffalo Grove, Illinois area. And this was the place where everybody saw Lee in his element. He was happy. He was smiling. He was social. He planned events. He had all of this stuff going on, to the point where some of the folks that came into this local youth group would look up to Lee as a mentor. So this was one of his ways that he could step away from maybe not always feeling like he belonged. And this was the place that he absolutely felt that he belonged and he should be. We're going to put a pin in that for a little bit later as well. So now I want to jump into the time of his disappearance. So we're going to start with the night before, which was October 19th of 2007. This was a Friday night. So school's done for the week. Lee's in his senior year. He's probably got a little bit of senioritis setting in within that first month or so of school. And they had a family birthday party to go to that night. So they were all headed to a nearby restaurant to celebrate as a family. He goes there with his mother and his stepfather and the brother. After the dinner, he's seen outside being very social with some of his family members. He ends up coming home after it and goes up to his mom and says, hey mom, I really want to go to a sleepover. A couple of my friends want to just hang out all night and play video games type of thing. And he's 18 at the time. So she's like, sure, fine, go do whatever you want to do. He goes up to his mom and says, thanks so much, mom. I love you. Gives her a super big hug. So he goes to his friend's house. They are three teenage boys. They stay up all night playing video games, as you do. Later in the night, at around midnight, Lee ends up texting with a female friend about how he felt that he didn't fit in and that he was having a hard time. And she just brushed it off as, hey, you're great. Don't worry about it. You're hanging out with your friends. Everything's going to be fine in the morning. So nobody really thought anything of it. The next morning, Lee's mom had not heard from him. So she starts to get a little worried. She calls him a couple times. She texts him quite a bit, still can't reach him. The last report we have of anybody actually seeing or talking to Lee was that morning at 9:50. Lee and one of his friends that was at the sleepover by the name of Alex leave the sleepover. Lee's going to drop Alex off at home before he has to go work at the mall that day. So he's like, hey, I'm going to drop you off, go get gas. I'm going to go to work and life's going to be great. A little bit later that morning, Lee's mother starts to grow worried. And she says, gosh, I still haven't heard from him. He's not answering his texts. Now this is a little unlike him because yes, he would maybe go for the night without messaging me, but we're super close. But maybe he got caught up at the sleepover and he had to go to work right away. So I was just going to go to the mall. So Lee's mom gets to the store that he worked at and finds his manager. And she's like, hey, Lee was supposed to work today at noon. Is he here? The manager's like, oh, no. But not super alarming. He might have misunderstood me. We kind of switched some shifts around. And so maybe he thought he was supposed to come in today at 5 instead of noon. So she's like, all right, I'll just go back home. I'll start to call some of his friends and see if we can maybe figure out if anybody else heard from him. And I'll wait till 5. So 5 o'clock rolls around and she calls at 5 o'clock and 30 seconds and says, hey, is Lee there yet? Ooh, so sorry. Still didn't show up for what would have been this misunderstood shift. So now we're starting to get pretty worried. And as she's calling more and more friends that day, she does find out that BBYO was supposed to have an event that night. They're going to meet up at this bowling alley at 8 p.m. So this is October 20th, 2007, 8 p.m. So his mom says, okay, I'm pretty concerned. Nobody's heard from him, but hey, BBYO is super important. So Lee's parents decide that they're going to go to the bowling alley that night. So they show up at 8 o'clock. They wait around for a little bit. Lee never shows up. That's when their first big alarm bell went off. They're like, okay, everything else in conjunction with he didn't show up to this BBYO event. So at 9:40 p.m. that Saturday, October 20th, they call him in as a missing person. And are concerned. They're like, you know what? This is kind of what Lee does. When he's stressed out or he's super depressed, he needs to go be by himself. Sometimes he goes for a ride. We're not going to panic at this point. So they said, we know there's 2 places that he really loves to go to clear his mind. Janelle, if you were going to go clear your mind somewhere, give me 1 or 2 places that you would go.
The bar?
Okay, I'll accept the answer. I may too also go to a bar. I may also go to a beach. However, neither of those places were where Lee's friends went to go look for him because Lee liked to go clear his mind at an Oasis truck stop because Lee really found some solitude in talking to truck drivers.
Okay.
So I grew up in Wisconsin and we would go down to Illinois quite often to go to Chicago or whatever. And there's actually these kind of cool oases. It's almost like a sky bridge over the highway and truck drivers would stop there and it's almost like a mini food court. I imagine that's one of the places that he would go to. Place number 2 that Lee would like to go to, also not on our list, the rooftop of a parking garage. They look at these places, they can't find Lee. So now it gets to be 11 o'clock that night and they're like, okay, Lee, it's been a really fun game, but stop playing around. Where are you? His friends start to get together and they talk to Alex and they're like, hey, he dropped you off and he was going to go to work. And he said he was going to the gas station. Let's figure out what gas station's along that route. They narrow it down to a speedway. They go to the speedway and they're like, hey, I think our friend was here. I think he stopped for gas. Here's a picture of him. Did you see him? Yeah. We saw that guy today at around 10 o'clock. Cool. It's now like midnight, 2:30 in the morning. You just saw him a couple hours ago. Let's go find him. So another family friend of Lee's comes in and says, hey, you just saw Lee. Can we get the surveillance tape? Ooh, would love to give you the surveillance tape. However, it can only be accessed by management. And the management is not on site right now. Okay, cool. When are they going to be back? Oh, tomorrow morning. Great. We'll come back tomorrow morning. So they go back tomorrow morning, which is what, hours later. And they're like, so sorry. We recorded over that tape. And also, so sorry, part 2. I know we told you that it was 10 p.m. It was actually 10 a.m. that we saw him. So who the fuck knows where he is? Remember, we had the police involved. So at this point, they are going to start an investigation. The police say, hey, can we come search the house? Let's search his bedroom. Let's see if we see anything that's unturned. So they search his bedroom and they're like, nothing indicates that he was going to leave for a long time. Nothing indicates foul play. Nothing seems super out of place. And they basically chalked it up to, you know what? He's 18, so guess what? He can go missing if he wants to because he's an adult. And fuck you, family. You don't know anything. The family obviously doesn't love that. Some people say, hey, can we search his room again? Maybe we'll see something that they didn't see. All right, yeah, fine, whatever. We'll take whatever help we can get at this point. They go in and they're like, hey, didn't Lee have this big jar of change and money that he would save? And his mom's like, yeah, well, it's not in here. It's gone. Okay, that's concerning because they estimated that that was probably anywhere from $500 to $800. And that was back in 2007. So it's a decent chunk of change. It's probably not going to get you overseas, but you could do some damage on that. I mean, Maura Murray went missing with what, 140?
She had, I think, 280.
I was gonna say, I knew it was under $300. And she thought that was gonna get her away for a weekend. So I can't imagine where he's thinking $500 to $800 is going.
Was there any record of him like going to a bank to cash that in?
Mm-mm.
Obviously, you're not going to just take off with your giant jar of coins.
He's like, I got it, and here it is, and I'm putting it in my backpack, and I'm going.
Like, you're not going to go get a hotel room and count out your quarter. I would assume they checked his bank records.
So they did check his bank records, and there was no activity on that. However, and I'm not a cop, I'm not an investigator, and so I don't know how much you would go into this, but maybe we check the local banks, not just his bank. Did he cash it in another bank? Or like every Walmart has those coin things. Did he go into one of those and try to turn it in? Nowhere did I see that they investigated that. Nowhere did I see that they found that he did turn that in. His family is obviously distraught by this. They're like, this is not like him. Yes, he goes on drives, but he always comes back within 24 hours. Yes, he sometimes doesn't call me back within 12 hours, but it's usually within a day that he calls his mom back. And so they're very frustrated when the cops go, well, our job's done here. He ran away. So they found a loophole in this. Oh, hey, police officers. Lee's actually an endangered missing person because he has some severe mental health issues. So this stems from Lee met the first love of his life when he was a freshman in high school. And at the time, his girlfriend was a junior. So they were 3 years apart. I'm talking head over heels. She was basically like, we should get married. And ironically, he broke it off with her because she was going off to college and he was like, I just don't think it's going to work. But it wrecked him to the point of him bringing a knife to school and attempting to die by suicide. This was his sophomore year, I believe. And when he brought this knife to school, his mother recognized this and did equivalent to what's Florida's Baker Act, where basically if somebody's mentally unstable, you can have them go into a facility for 72 hours. Lee's mother recognized the vulnerable state that he was in, so she wasn't going to push him to do more than that, and basically said, if you want to come back home, come back home. If you want to stay here, you can stay here. And he was like, get me the fuck out of here. So he came home, but I think they diagnosed him with, at a minimum, had depression. So this allowed Lee's family to go back to the police department and say, hey, now you have to start a case because he's an endangered missing person. So they immediately put out this telegraph to all the local police stations in the area. And I think at this point, we probably had a national database where his info went into, type of thing. So they got a hold of his cell phone records. And during the investigation of his cell phone records, they did see the conversations that he had with the individual that he was texting with around midnight, the morning that he went missing. And they saw some pings in the area where he was having the sleepover. But his battery must have died, or he turned his phone off or something, because after about 12:20 in the morning of October 20th, they couldn't ping him anymore. So they couldn't even ping him like when he dropped Alex off. They couldn't ping him at the gas station, none of that. So essentially it was like he vanished. But it wasn't until 2 days later, police find a suspicious vehicle in Baraboo, Wisconsin. This is almost 200 miles from Buffalo Grove, Illinois. When the police run the plates, it comes back to being registered to Lee Cutler, who was a missing person. What I want to say here is kudos for technology and kudos for the police department for doing this, because had we not had either of those, the police would have just seen this as another abandoned car and moved on. The police went even another step further and said, hey, we see this abandoned car. We know it's a missing person. There's no foul play that we can see just by doing a quick glance of it and the car's locked. We're going to just hang out here. So they waited there for about 12 hours to see if anybody would come in or out of the car, and they didn't see anybody. Now they have to start looking into other avenues. So they obviously call these parents and say, hey, we've located his car. The car's locked. We don't suspect foul play. We sat here all night. We didn't see anybody come to or from the car. We don't know what's next. So his family goes to Baraboo, Wisconsin. So that very next day, when it gets to be light out, they can start conducting a ground search. They do an air search. They have heat sensors that go out, all of these things. So where Lee's car was found was like on this rest stop, essentially near a wooded area, close to an interstate, but far enough away. They searched the woods around this area. And when they got just a little bit into the woods, they found what they call a makeshift campsite. Like maybe a campfire could have been made, because you could see rocks like made in a circle. You see this material that's overhanging that it would protect him from rain or whatever. They find a couple other things in this makeshift campsite, but one of the things that they find is a backpack, and Lee's parents can confirm that this is Lee's backpack. They also find an empty bottle of Advil PM and an empty bottle of quercetin. And quercetin at this time, it was really big for recreational use, and it would get you high, essentially. And I don't know what the effects would be if you would mix the two, but I can't imagine that it would be good. The Advil PM wasn't unusual for Lee to have. He really had a hard time sleeping, so this was like an everyday thing for him to take Advil PM, but a whole bottle is a little bit concerning. It's at this time that the police do their initial press conference, and Lee's mother made a statement, and I want to play it for you all because it really broke my heart to hear her kind of break down.
This is breaking my heart. I love you so much. I have a void in my heart. This is killing me. You don't think you're loved. You're loved. You're loved. Your friends love you. Your parents love you. Your neighbors love you. That's it.
All right, so obviously that was very, very, very heartbreaking. Hearing that as a mom just pulled at all of my heartstrings. The police continue their investigation. They bring in a dive team. They are doing everything they can. About 10 feet from where they found this makeshift campsite, there is a river. While they're doing this dive search, they don't find Lee, but they do find his yarmulke. And dude went everywhere with his yarmulke. This was his pride and joy. And it was his favorite yarmulke. 5 days later, the divers found even more items that were determined to be Lee's. So they found these items on a branch that was hanging over the river. And what they found was his pants, which were some khaki pants that he was wearing that day. They found his wallet, and in his wallet was his school ID, his driver's license, the keys to his car, and $70 in cash. They also found his belt next to his pants. What was even sadder is when they did start to look at some of the contents of Lee's items and what was in his backpack, they did end up finding a note. And this note read, "My head is too big for my body. Finally, I'll get to sleep. I'm sorry, Mom, that I'm a coward. I love you, Mom. Please be happy." My initial thought was this was his goodbye, right? It also rang true to what his friends and family said earlier of he writes things a little cryptic where it's like he definitely knows what that means, but I have to try and interpret what that means. Thoughts? I see you like, well, maybe
No,
not.
I feel like that's pretty cut and dry.
You think?
Telling his mom to please be happy. That's not something you would say unless you knew that she was about to get something really upsetting coming at her.
Yeah, and I don't want to do like too much of a spoiler alert, but I think it could lead to one of two ways of either I'm saying goodbye because I'm ending my life, or I'm saying goodbye because I'm starting over somewhere.
Running away.
So either way, it seemed like a goodbye. But one person did make a good point, which was we don't know when that letter was written. He could have wrote that 6 months ago, or he could have wrote that the day that he went missing. We have no idea. Again, up for speculation, up for interpretation.
Was it on its own in his backpack? Was it in a notebook?
In doing a little bit of research on this, it sounded like this was kind of like in a notebook of other things. And maybe it was torn out, but it wasn't like the only note or the only writing that was there type of thing. But it was the only one that was really talked about. So finding the new items, the pants, the belt, the wallet, prompted the police to go back out and search again. So now we are dragging the entire river in this area. We're putting helicopters out again. We're searching grid by grid, all of the things up until the point where the sheriff finally went on record to say, if Lee was in that immediate area, we would have found him. He did note where Lee's car was found. It's only about 7 miles from the interstate. So it's not an easy walk, but it's walkable. After they did all of these searches and all this stuff's going on, they finally said, okay, we can't find him, but we found all this stuff. Now we can go into his car. And they did find a couple things that were notable in there. They found a receipt from a Walmart in Madison, Wisconsin, which is about, I don't know, I lived in this area. I could probably get from Baraboo to Madison in 20-30 minutes. The receipt from Walmart showed the purchase of the Tylenol PM as well as the Chlorocidin pills. And so they went to that Walmart and they pulled up surveillance and they saw Lee going into that Walmart by himself, making that purchase and then leaving by himself. Another thing that they noted in there was a receipt from a state forest in Wisconsin called Kettle State Forest. There's only 2 entrances to this forest. One was near the Milwaukee area, which was about 2 hours away from where everything else was found. One was in the Whitewater area, which would be kind of smack dab in between Madison and Baraboo, depending on the route that you took. One thing that they thought was funny about this state park admission ticket was the admission price that it stated that he paid was a Wisconsin resident admission price. Now, the difference between the 2 prices was minimal. It was $7 for in-state and $10 for out-of-state. It could mean that he had somebody in his car with a Wisconsin license. It could also mean that he had a teenager who didn't really care about his job and said, dude, are you from Wisconsin? Yeah, fine. And let him in for $7. They did also find one of his favorite books, which was called Into the Wild. And this, for people that have not read it, myself included, talks about a young man that doesn't feel accepted, doesn't feel included, doesn't feel like he fits in, and so cuts ties with his family, cuts ties with his friends, moves away, disappears, and starts a new life type of thing. Some people speculated, was Lee doing a real life Into the Wild thing? Now that we have all this evidence, I do want to go through our timeline again to give us an idea of what happened. We have the family birthday party the Friday night before. The whole family goes to the party, Lee included. He's having a good night. He comes home, asks his mom to go to a sleepover, goes to his friend's house, texts a friend around midnight about being depressed. That's the last time his phone pings. The next day, Alex states at 9:50, they leave the friend's house so that Lee can drive Alex home before he goes to work. Lee was supposed to be to work the next day by noon. Lee is last spotted by a gas station attendant in Buffalo Grove at a speedway at 10 a.m. 3 hours after that, he's spotted in Madison, Wisconsin at a Walmart, which is 135 miles north of Buffalo Grove, Illinois. 23 minutes after being seen on surveillance at Walmart, he has a receipt stamped that he paid to get into the Kettle State Forest. Then 100 miles west in Baraboo, he goes and parks at this wayside. And his car wasn't found until 3:40 in the morning, so he had plenty of time to get there, I guess. One other thing to note, when they did find his car, his gas tank was empty, and he had passed several gas stations along the way. That is unfortunately where the story ends with Lee Cutler. We don't know anything more. His family does have a Facebook page that was super active when it first started and died down in about 2015. They do post every year, like around Christmas and the anniversary, and his birthday is also in October, but the daily activity has kind of died down, sadly. Questions before we get into what we think might have happened.
So I have to assume that we talked to these boys that were at the sleepover extensively, right?
Extensively, I don't know.
Like, did something happen? Did they notice anything? Obviously, if he was texting somebody else at midnight saying he was feeling a type of way.
So they all said that everything was normal that night. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary. And even the friend that he was texting was like, hey, Lee, you're just like overreacting type of thing. Everything's fine. And he drove the boy home the next day, so they couldn't have been like fighting or anything. And he didn't call in sick to work the next day.
If something had gone terribly wrong, he could have just come home from the guy's house.
His car was there. He had a phone. He had his wallet. He had a good relationship with his mom, so it wasn't like it would have been crazy. One thing that I didn't talk a ton about is because he was very much into his religion, he was very gung-ho on, I eventually want to move to Israel and become part of their army. That is my life goal type of thing. I want to help create peace for them. And one person even took it a step further to say that on October 20th, 2007, there was a section of the Islamic religious calendar that stated that you are to quote, head out onto the open road. So some people put those things together and say, maybe he decided to make his own pilgrimage.
Maybe, but I know it sounds like a simple thing, but why wouldn't you take the $70 with you? Maybe you don't need your IDs anymore because that's your old life, but $70 is $70.
Right. Another argument I could make to that is if somebody was trying to stage something, maybe you would leave money to make it look like you left.
Yeah, but I still think the IDs being left, that's something.
Yeah, you can't get to Israel without IDs, right? Are we stowing away on a cargo ship?
Obviously, before he went to the sleepover, he would have had to have packed everything that he thought he was going to need for his new start over life. Even the guy that he dropped off didn't notice, why do you have this huge bag back here? Or
Maybe it was minimal. Maybe he just had whatever he had at the sleepover. And then
but he left
pound
his
of money.
pants. He left his pants at the.
So that's bananas to me too. So he's running around with a shirt and his underwear somewhere. The Daniel Robinson of it all. Like he ran around in his underwear and just died. And if you're gonna change all your clothes, then why aren't you changing your shirt too? And if we found literally almost everything else, why are we not finding his shirt or his underwear or his shoes?
So we know that for whatever reason, he deliberately went to make this temporary campsite.
Yes, 100%. I highly encourage everybody to go watch the disappeared episode. It was actually really well done. And in that episode, there is this makeshift campsite, and it was verified that the items that were there were Lee's. And the receipt verifies that the medication that was found there was purchased by him.
I'm assuming we checked out any large bodies of waters where this river led to.
So I don't think it fed into anything super big, but they did drag the river multiple times. And like I said, the police sheriff went on record to say if he was in this immediate area, we would have found him. So he's last seen at Buffalo Grove at 10 a.m. on Saturday. 3 hours later, he's at the Walmart. 23 minutes later, he's at the campground. The campground is 100 miles west. So at a minimum, if we're going straight to straight at 1:30 p.m. the next day on Saturday, he could get to the campground. And if he just goes in the campground and out, let's say he leaves there at 2 o'clock, he could get to this point in Baraboo by 3:30, 4 o'clock that next afternoon. Let's say he got there at 4 o'clock. They find it at 4 o'clock the next morning. He probably stayed at Kettle Moraine longer, but let's say it happened perfectly. They found it 12 hours later. They searched that river that next day. So it's not like he's going from the Wisconsin River to the Mississippi in less than 24 hours, right?
And the family, I'm sure if there was any sentimental value of this area to him, they would probably know.
Yeah, they said he went there once. He never talked about it. We don't know why he'd go there again.
But that's something that.
I mean, it's definitely something. It's not quite the Maury of it all because I feel like her family vacationed up there multiple times.
Yeah.
I remember that one time I went to this one place with my family. I'm going to go there again. And I'll go back to, he liked to rest his mind in peculiar places, right? He's going to the top of the parking garage. He's going to the truck stop. It could have been that he just was going to truck stops along the way, and this is where he ended up.
So, Jamie, what are the pills called again?
They're called Coricidin. They're a cold medicine. They are now behind the counter at Walgreens, but at the time they were very popular to overdose, and people would call them sea monkeys. And they would get you really high if you took.
Never heard of this.
Multiple of them. Yeah, I grew up in Wisconsin in the Midwest, and this is what they do.
Yeah, Midwesterners.
Side note, I never did any of these things.
But why buy uppers to mix with a downer?
With a downer, yeah. That was crazy to me. Unless he was just like I don't know what these sea monkeys do to me, but I do know what Tylenol PM does to me. So if I take enough of both, it'll be great.
Is it possible he got into an accident of some sort? Were there cliffs or what was the terrain like?
Wisconsin is fairly flat. Now, the Wisconsin Dells Baraboo area does have a lot of these like cliff areas and that kind of terrain, but where his car was found, no. But in Baraboo, there's this park called Devil's Lake, and you can go hiking in it, and there's tons of cliffs in Wisconsin Dells, which is very close to Baraboo. You can take like Dells boat tours, and it's through all these cliffs and stuff like that. So there is that terrain out there. However, from all intents and purposes, where he was stopped at this truck stop, I don't think it was within walking distance for him to get on something like that.
And how far was the car from the campsite?
We're talking 5 to 10 miles, like not very far at all. They found it within hours of searching. And it's like one of those waysides. You have them in Texas too. Not in Dallas in the concrete jungle, but in the outskirts where you're driving down a country road and you go to the side and there's woods or whatever
Yeah.
y'all have there, cacti and scorpions and fucking wild boars that eat teeth. Eat teeth.
I don't know in the history of SWAC if I have ever gone with suicide before. This just sounds like it's a lot of things that definitely don't make sense together. But he got himself to that place.
100%. And he was on a mission, right? Like he knew exactly where he was going and had these stops. It was
Yeah.
definitely purposeful.
Definitely purposeful. And if I'm about to go make a makeshift tent in the woods, it'll never happen, guys.
Without your shoes on?
Never, absolutely never happen. But there's a lot of other things that I'm gonna pick up at Walmart.
Yeah, and those were the only things on his receipt. They checked the surveillance.
Then, man, that makes me really sad. I can't even say the sentence, but I guess that's what I think.
Okay, initially where my mind went to, but I want to debunk it a little bit. Because my first thing is when you die by suicide, you don't get to then go hide your body. Where the fuck is it?
It's the wilderness, right?
Yes, but we don't have bear in that area. We might have a mountain lion. We might have a deer or a badger. But I don't think we have A, anything that's eating bones, or B, anything that is dragging it so far that it's not found within that initial police search. So that is bananas to me. My number 2 debunk on the suicide is where the fuck is the rest of the money? $800 and you only have $70 left and all you did was go to Walmart and buy 2 bottles of pills. Those are just 2 big sticking points to me where I'm like, what the fuck? And his cell phone was never found. His shirt and his underwear and his shoes, we don't know where those are either. I guess the water could have maybe carried him to somewhere.
He could have thrown his phone out the car window 100 miles back.
That's true. I'll give you that.
I don't know about weather-wise, but I would think it's about to get pretty cold there at that time of year, if it's not already.
Yeah, so I would say October, there have been rare Halloweens where it snowed. So I would say at best, we're in the 70s, 80s for highs in the day. And I'm talking those are records. Average, we're probably talking 50s, 60s during the day, 30s, 40s at night. Not enough where he's going to freeze to death, but definitely be uncomfortable.
I'm just gonna assume that he had another pair of pants on him.
I don't think he slept in his khakis at the sleepover, right? But maybe he slept in his boxers. That wasn't talked about.
Let's just say maybe he changed clothes and then went off to explore, but he's taken some stuff and maybe he couldn't make it back to the campground. Maybe there was an accident. Maybe he wasn't prepared for the elements. And 30s and 40s, like, I'm not messing around with that.
Hmm.
What if you fall and sustain a head injury and then you're miles away from your tent?
I don't know how far the area is that they searched, but it seemed like a normal search area for police. What do they say, a 3 mile square radius is
Yeah.
typically what they search. So could he have went outside of that? Probably. If you're fucked up and depressed and don't care, you could just keep walking. You had to have some kind of purpose to leave your pants and your belt and your wallet hanging on a tree limb.
And your backpack. If you are going to go off and explore other areas, that's one thing you would take with you.
Somebody could have planted that stuff there. Could he have been abducted and somebody wanted to make it look like suicide? Whether he died by suicide or not, all of the breadcrumbs lead us to believe that, except for where the fuck is the body? There's the pills, there's the makeshift campsite. There is the car that was purposely left there with no gas. There's all of his belongings being there and the note. So everything leads you to suicide.
So what do
But
you think?
I'll go with you a little bit in everything just seems so purposeful, right? He missed his BBYO event. He took his money. He left the note. He has everything left in this makeshift camp area. He left his car perfectly out of gas. Sure, everything leads to death by suicide. But why couldn't it be that he met some foul play? What if it started out as, I had a really shitty night. I didn't feel good about myself. I'm going to skip work today. I'm not going to tell anybody about it. Maybe I'll come back, maybe I won't. I took this money, so probably not. And one of my favorite places to go is to go to truck stops. So I'm gonna go to the first truck stop that I see along the way. And I'm gonna head towards Wisconsin because I've been to Baraboo before and that sounds great. We have done enough true crime to know that a lot of bad things happen in truck stop areas. What if he was abducted? What if he was raped? What if something happened to him and his body was disposed of and they're like, what can I do to try and cover this up? And they were smart like Ted Bundy and created a suicide trail and got away with it.
He is the only one on camera at Walmart making that purchase. So are you saying this abduction happened after that?
So that's my sticking point with the abduction because
If he was already en route.
why would you go to Walmart and buy those pills if you didn't have intentions of ending your life? He could have met foul play after he bought the stuff and he could have had second thoughts and not wanted to do the stuff, but we found the empty packages at the makeshift campsite. That just seems too perfect. So I did go down that rabbit hole for a little bit and then I was like, maybe not. But the bigger rabbit hole I'm down is, remember the guy in Florida that faked his own death, had his friend shoot him on the fishing boat, and then we didn't find him until like 20 years later because he died, and we got him recognized by DNA and found out that he had left his life. Anyways, all that to say is it is possible to run away from your life. People have done it before. In this case, I honestly and truly believe that is what happened for a couple reasons. First of all, he was having a hard time mental health wise, right? He was depressed. He didn't feel like he fit in. His best friend was probably his mom. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that. I also really, really struggle with what I was just telling you before. You can't die by suicide and have your body fucking disappear. That is just unheard of. I would venture to say that less than 20% of suicide deaths do we not have a body.
But doing it in your house as opposed to doing it in the wilderness is totally different.
It is, but unless you went into that body of water and floated away, I'm going back to, we have deer, maybe a bobcat. There's not even really bears in that area. So who the fuck is dragging his body away?
There's nothing that says that he attempted it there.
Got you. Other than there was empty pill bottles, but there's nothing to say that he could have taken those pills and went somewhere and just left the trash there. Maybe if you're being really clever, feeling some type of way, but let's even say I did go 3 states away and I go to somewhere to die by suicide. Aren't you still going to find my body at some point? We're almost at the 20-year mark of him missing. It's just odd to me. So the fact that we can't find his body, and then the money. Where'd all that money go? Why does he only have $70 left out of $500 to $800 in a 2-day span? Not even 24 hours, probably. Where'd it go? What did he do with it? And the fact that he was just like so tied to his religion Just makes me wonder if he went so hard into something religious wise or something like that, where he couldn't come back to his family, or really truly wanted to disappear and thought it was best for everybody. Like, I don't get along with my stepdad. My mom will be better off without me anyways. I don't really have any friends. I already broke up with my girlfriend. I already had the one true love of my life come and go. The fuck am I around here for anyways? Why don't I just go a million miles away and just start over? Now, do I think it was in Israel? No, because I don't know how the fuck you get overseas without your IDs. But could he be somewhere else in the US where there's maybe a very big Jewish camp and he's doing something there under a new name? Maybe. Or could have hit his head, like you said, had an accident, something like that. Doesn't remember who the fuck he is. Maybe even went to the hospital and woke up and doesn't know who he is and has to live a new life by force. So it's kind of the camp that I'm in. I originally went down suicide row and was like, hey, this is what happened, because he wrote the note, he had the pills, he had the whatever. But the more and more I searched about it and read some stuff from his family, and again, I know they're probably like grasping at and hanging on to that hope, and rightfully so. But the more and more I looked into that, I was like, I think he staged his own suicide to make it look like he did that, to say, close the chapter on me. I've moved on. I need you to also move on. I know we've talked about it a couple times on these episodes where it's like, how can you move away from your family and never come back and let them go through all that turmoil? On the flip side, how do you come back after doing something like that? I know everybody likes to say, well, I'll take them back at any cost. Yes, probably initially, but there's going to be some repercussions with that. So that's where I'm at. I guess I'm in the camp of, I think he staged his own suicide and he's living a life somewhere and hopefully happy. I hope you're happy, Lee. I do think there was some mental health issues here, and I do think we don't pay enough attention to that in society. I'm sad. It sucks. This guy didn't feel like he was enough, and his family struggles with never seeing him again. I do want to go over some specs about Lee Cutler. There have been some sightings along the way. If you're in my camp and you think he might be out there living some kind of life, please keep your eyes and ears open. Watch the Disappeared episode. We'll put some age progression photos on our Facebook page. But at the time Lee went missing, again, this was 2007. He was 18 years old. He is a white male. He was 6 feet tall. At the time he went missing, he was 161 pounds. He had brown hair, brown eyes. He did have a small bump on his upper left lip, and he had a slight webbing on 2 of his toes. So those are some distinct things that you could look out for. If you do have any information on Lee Cutler, this still is an active case, so you are very much encouraged to contact the Buffalo Grove Police Department at 847-459-2583 with any tips. And unfortunately, until somebody comes up with a credible tip or we come up with some kind of remains, we can only speculate wildly and feel so awful for Mama Beth.